Hey everybody, I am super excited for this video because this is the one that starts really the whole purpose of my starting this series, and it's going to be focused on movies that I think are really amazing, and for some reason just the rest of the world doesn't feel the same way. So I'm here to defend these movies tooth and nail. I don't care if everybody else in the whole world hates them. I love them, and I'm going to tell you why. I could not be more excited to do a video on Rocky 5, because this is one of those movies that I feel like I'm in an alternate universe when I look at IMDb and I see like the relatively low rating it has compared to the other Rocky sequels, and I just don't understand the hatred for this movie. It makes me so upset when I read it, because I'm going to be honest with you, and you might just turn this video off right now and say, this guy's got no credibility whatsoever. This is probably my third favorite Rocky film. After probably, well, of course the first is the best, but then maybe Rocky 2, just because I think empirically Rocky 2 is the best sequel, and it was one of the best that we could have had because it moved everybody logically forward and it still gave us that really satisfying ending. And you know, I just think Rocky 2 overall is a great sequel, but yeah, I think this one's my third favorite film, really. And I'm gonna go into some of the reasons why, but first I thought the easiest way to tackle this, because there's a lot of criticisms of Rocky 5, so I'm going to go into some of the things that people often say is wrong with it first, and I'm going to kind of go through those bullet points and talk about why I don't think those criticisms are right on this movie, and then I'm going to tell you some strengths of Rocky 5 that I think elevate it a lot higher than some of the other sequels in the series that are often more highly regarded. So, okay. I'm going to kind of put these not necessarily in order of predominance that I've seen them said about the movie, but maybe in the order that I have the best comebacks, rebukes for these particular criticisms. So one of the criticisms that I've heard a lot is that the music is very dated, because unlike the first really the first three Rocky movies, the fifth Rocky movie has a lot of 90s specific rap music in it, and it's very of the time period. Right, now, I'm going to get way more into Rocky 4 and how it measures up to Rocky 5 later in this video, because that's a really easy way to make a lot of my points as to why I don't understand why this one's so hated. But anybody watching this saying, oh, the music's dated because it's rap music and it was the 90s, did they miss Rocky 4? Because that score is one of the most dated 80s synth-heavy scores I have ever seen. And now, I love it because I grew up with Rocky 4, but it is gloriously cheesy to the point of self-parody. It's so bad and over the top. Don't get me wrong, Rocky 4 is still an incredibly entertaining movie, but I'm not sure for the reasons they were going for. It's really campy. Now, Rocky 5, okay, disclaimer, by the way, I despise rap music. I hate it. One of my least liked music genres is right up there with country. I can't stand listening to it. But the rap in Rocky 5 has never bothered me. I don't know. I feel like it suits the material, which was set in the 90s, and although there's this whole weird timeline with the Rocky films, which I won't get into because it's really screwed up. But let's just say it's set in the 90s when it was made. And I don't know, it just seems to fit the time period, and you want that kind of gritty, on the streets feel from the 90s. That's kind of what you'd have at that time period. So the music has never really bothered me. I can understand why some people might be put off by it, but again, I feel like Rocky 4 broke the mold of the classic Bill Conti scores way worse than this movie. This movie at least still has a lot of Bill Conti music in it, or Conti-esque music in it, whereas Rocky 4 really didn't. That was really all 80s from beginning to end. That was all 80s music. So I feel like Rocky 4 is more guilty of that than Rocky 5. But anyway, of inappropriate music. So the second criticism I read a lot is that it's not really a Rocky movie because we don't get Rocky in the ring. Okay, I would argue that that sets this Rocky movie apart in a good way. It's not just formula. It's not the same story all over again. It does have a point beyond who's this week's, who's the villain of the week. You know, is it, you know, Apollo, or is it Clubber, or is it Ivan Drago? I mean, this is a personal story. And there is a fight for those who want to fight, but it's not about a boxing match. This movie's about, I would argue, more than that, and we'll actually get into that too. But I don't see that as a criticism of this movie. Honestly, I think that's a plus, that it actually broke the formula. And I'm going to get into more of why I think this movie breaks formula in a good way. So I don't get that criticism if I'm not being in the ring. Bad acting from Stage Stallone. I don't get this either. I thought he did a fantastic job, especially for his age. Granted, I mean, you know, he was Stallone's actual son. Tragically, he's gone now. But I actually didn't know that until a few years ago. That I don't know if it was, I think it was drugs. I'm not positive. I don't want to misspeak there, but he has passed on. But I thought he did a very good job in this role. I have never had a problem. You know, maybe just slightly hammy, slightly overdone. But I mean, kids at that age are a little that way. They are a little bit, you know, overabundant in their emotions, let's say. I have a 12-year-old son, and he's constantly overcompensating because kids at that age are trying to be adults, and when they don't, it is very awkward. When they don't quite measure up to that, it's very awkward because they're just not quite there yet. I thought he pulled that off very convincingly to me. Okay, these two are kind of linked, but bad acting from Tommy Morrison. That's another big criticism that Rocky V gets. All I want to say is, I can understand the criticism. The next criticism I'm going to cite is that Tommy Gunn is an uninteresting foe for Rocky. That one I can actually understand a little bit more than bad acting from Tommy Morrison. The reason is, if your criticism is merely on the acting, solely on the acting, not on the character, what type of character he is, but the level of acting chops from this guy, has that ever really been a strong suit of the Rocky series? Are you really comparing Tommy Morrison's acting chops to, say, Mr. T or Dolph Lundgren? I mean, I'm not saying that they weren't fun villains and good, you know, characters we love to hate, because they were. But De Niro level acting? Come on. Like, these guys were, it was comical, especially in Rocky 3, where it's like, what's your prediction? Pain. You know, I like to make fun of it. It's so hammy. It's over the top. It's hilarious. And people don't have any problem with that. But maybe it's because Tommy Morrison in Rocky V is trying to play it more straight. He's supposed to be just like a normal guy, not an over-the-top caricature villain. I understand that, but to just say his acting sucks, there's been a lot of sucky acting in this series, and nobody else has been called out on it. That's all I'm getting at. So, an uninteresting foe in Tommy Gunn. That I can understand a little bit more. However, going back to this movie broke the mold, Tommy Gunn is not supposed to be an over-the-top caricature villain foe for Rocky. That's not his character. He's not supposed to be this larger-than-life, you know, wrecking machine in Clubber Lang coming after his title. He's not supposed to be this, he will lose, statue from the USSR and Ivan Drago. That's not who Tommy's supposed to be, this unassuming kind of guy that just walks in off the street. At least they gave the guy a backstory. I mean, think about it. You don't know anything about Ivan Drago except that he's so caricatured and crazy as a villain that he has the ability to punch with so much power that if someone could actually do it, they would decapitate you. You have Clubber Lang, who literally has no backstory whatsoever, except he's pissed that Rocky's champ and he wants the title. That's it. Yeah, I mean, they gave maybe a little more backstory to Apollo, but not much. I mean, maybe now you could say it's been retconned with Creed a little bit, but at the time we didn't really know that much about Apollo, except he's the champ. I'd say you got the most backstory to any villain before Tommy Gunn, probably in Rocky 2, when you had that scene in Apollo's house where he's upset at the criticism and he throws the reviews up in the air because it's eating at him that he lost this fight. You get a sense of who Apollo is, at least. But Clubber Lang, he's just a villain. That's all he is. Ivan Drago, just a villain. That's all he is. He's literally so stoic that he's literally turned into a Frankenstein monster. That's how he was treated. So I don't get this. They were fun villains. You can argue that Tommy Morrison's not a fun villain, but to say he's an uninteresting villain, I don't understand that criticism really either. And again, he wasn't meant to be that. He's meant to be somebody that Rocky could feel something for and then get kind of, maybe not fully betrayed by, but kind of left behind by, and realize this part of my life's over, and this guy's just going down the primrose path that George Washington Duke has laid out for him. And that leads me into another big criticism I hear of Rocky V, is that George Washington Duke, that character, is so cartoony that you can't take the rest of the movie seriously because this guy is just so over the top. And, again, I point you back to Clubber Lang and Ivan Drago. These characters were so ridiculously caricatured. It's not like, I don't understand why that's never been a problem before, but all of a sudden you get to Rocky V and now it's an issue. Again, I guess you could argue that maybe Rocky V is trying to play it straight, so you can't play the movie straight and have the cartoony villain. But I don't know, maybe it was a case of trying to have their cake and eat it too, because they had so many cartoony villains leading up to. Even Apollo in Rocky 2 is a lot more cartoony than he was in Rocky 1, because it was all about revenge. But so that's kind of my rebuttal against most of the criticisms. Oh, and one more thing on the George Washington Duke thing. He's literally playing Don King. Don King is a very cartoony person in real life. I thought the guy did fine. I definitely love to hate that character. So, okay. Strengths I find in Rocky V. And I just don't see why people don't see this in this movie. It has a much stronger focus on character than did Rocky IV. And I would argue, really, than most of them after Rocky II. I'd say stronger emphasis on character than 3 and 4. The character dynamic between him and his son is good. You've got the story with the brain damage, which I know a lot of people didn't like because they thought it made it sad, but extremely realistic at this point. That you're at the 5th movie of a boxing series. And to be honest, the way they've shot the boxing in Rocky, granted it makes the fights more fun to watch, but the guy never put his hands up, okay? He's gonna have some brain damage at this point. It's very realistic that this would have happened at this point, so I didn't have a problem with that. Much, much, much stronger emphasis on character. Literally Rocky IV, this is when I was gonna get back into Rocky IV and the comparisons. I don't get why understand why Rocky IV is so revered. Rocky IV, to me, will always be the worst in the series. And here's why. When people think of the mindless 1980s Sylvester Stallone action movie, I contend that they are thinking specifically about Rambo 2 and Rambo 3. Now, I love Rambo 2. I think it's a great, mindless, stupid action movie. Not so much Rambo 3. It's pretty forgettable. But those movies really didn't have a whole hell of a lot going on character-wise. It just didn't. The first one maybe a little bit more. I liked First Blood quite a bit as an actual drama, aside from the action. But yeah, Rambo 2 and Rambo 3, not so much. I really think that's what, when people think about the Rocky series, a lot of times when they're not very familiar with it, they're thinking mistakenly about the Rambo movies, and they're like, oh, those Rocky movies, they're just stupid. They're about people hitting each other. And if you really look at the structure of the Rocky series, I have defended this series for years as the stories are really good. Like the progression in sequel is very, very good between 1 and 2 and 3. It's a logical progression. Like in the first one, you've got this guy who's kind of down on his luck. He needs validation. He just wants to know he can, stand up. Doesn't even care if he beats this guy. He just wants to stand up toe to toe with him and see if he can last. And he does, and that's all the validation his life needs. And the fact that he, meets the love of his life along the way doesn't hurt. But that's all that story is about, and it's a simple story, and it's beautiful. And then the second one is this very logical progression where he's got this instant fame, but he blows all his money because he doesn't have experience with having that much money, and he's not financially smart. And but then and then he wins the championship at the end, and now he's the champion, and he's got all this money and this mansion, but it goes to his head, and so he gets beat, and he has to come back. And then in 4, it's like he's completely set for life, but his friend gets killed. And really, 4 is the first time, I think, that the series just said, we need an excuse to have this crazy villain, another crazy villain, because what else are you going to do? I mean, you've built Rocky up to, this. He had the match with Apollo Creed, then he had the rematch and he won. Then he fought Clubber and he lost, and so he's also conquered fear over a challenger. So he's going to be the champ. What are you going to do to get him back? It has to be a grudge match, right? This is where I'm going with the comparison when we get to 4 to 5, because 4 is the first one, I think, where they're just like, let's just have a series of montages. Even the freaking fight in Rocky 4 is a montage. That's one of the reasons I really dislike Rocky 4. As a film compared to the other Rocky movies. I still enjoy the hell out of Rocky 4, don't get me wrong, but I still think that it suffers a lot compared to the other, because it is one montage after another. There's a freaking music video in the middle of Rocky 4, okay? He gets in his car, like 4 or 5 minutes of screen time, just showing clips that you've seen in the last 15 minutes of the same movie. And it is so bad. And then you got training montage, and then you got like a 5-second scene of Rocky and Adrian, and then another training montage, and they get to the fight, and the fight is a freaking montage. They can't even film the fight in real time. It has to be like these wipes of punches, and it's so overdone. Everything about Rocky 4 is so 80s style that it just almost kills the movie for me. It really does. And then you've got this super, super cheesy ending where he's like bringing the old Soviet Union and the United States together, and can't we all just get along? It's so bad. So wonderful, but so bad. I don't understand, how is that movie better than Rocky 5? I don't understand it, because you get to Rocky 5 and he's taken all these blows, and like I said before, it's very realistic. He's gonna have some damage at this point. He's gotta quit. He goes back home. It's their old neighborhood. You got all this nostalgia that they're bringing back from Rocky 1 with how he's dressed and the relationship with his son. And this was something I wanted to get into. It breaks out of the formula so much so that I'm not positive about this, but I'm pretty sure that this is the first time in the Rocky series where there's more than one story going on at a time. And what I mean by that is, in the first Rocky, you pretty much follow Rocky from start to finish. That's it. There's a few scenes without him, but pretty much Sylvester Stallone carries that movie. Same thing in 2. You maybe have a couple of scenes because Adrian's pregnant and whatnot, and she's kind of feeling worse. But I mean, for the most part, that stays with Rocky as well. 3rd, same thing. 4, same thing. Like, there's just nothing outside of Rocky's immediate what he's doing. In Rocky 5, you actually have this side story with his son, like going to school and learning the ropes of a public school in Philadelphia as opposed to this, posh private school he was likely in, and learning to fight, and the fact that his dad's not giving him the attention that he needs. And then you've got Tommy going off with this promoter, and he's not respecting his roots with Rocky and not giving him the credit. And it's actually a pretty involved story compared to, Rocky just needs a training montage in the last movie, and he needs to fight Drago because he killed Apollo. It's so simple. This one actually has more than one thing going on, and I thought that was really good. I think and this could have gone in the criticism column. Some people didn't like the way that Stallone portrayed Rocky in this movie. I loved it. In fact, I actually just recently watched what some people call the director's cut, but it's really more of the work print. It's really not all that much different. A lot of people are like, oh, it's so much better. I didn't really see that. It was so unfinished. And there were some parts that I thought were very awkward. I'm glad that they cut out what they cut out for the most part. There were a couple good scenes, but I think Rocky V theatrical cut, I think it stands just fine. I don't need to see a longer version released personally. But I think if you look back at the Rocky films, I think Rocky V is the closest Stallone portrayal to the original Rocky character since the original film. If you watch them back to back, which I've done several times, the Rocky in Rocky II is quite a bit slower than the Rocky in Rocky I. And I know part of that comes from the story. He has to be a little bit slow. He has to be a little bit naive with his money. They have to explain away why he blows so much money. I get that, but I felt like Rocky's character in the first film, while he was not book smart, he had this kind of inner wisdom, you know? It's almost like, this is a very, very strange comparison, but I almost compare him to the character of Sam on Cheers. Like, he's this kind of goofy character most of the time, you know, but when it's a dramatic scene and when it calls for it, you realize, no, he really understands what's going on, and he's really got depth of feeling there. Just most of the time he comes off as this kind of, you know, I don't know what I'm doing, you know, I'm uncomfortable in my own skin type of character. But that's different than playing him as mentally slow, I feel like. I don't feel like they did that in the first movie, and I feel like they did in the second. In the third movie, completely different character. He's in a suit when we first see him. He's talking better. Now, granted, he's got money now, so that makes sense. But it's not the same character. It just isn't. I mean, he didn't even look the same. Like, he is so chiseled in Rocky III compared to 2. He's definitely the most out of shape in 2 than any in the series. And then Rocky IV, kind of the same character as he was in 3, but he was so far removed at that point from where Rocky was in the first film. I feel like the portrayal in Rocky V is very, very close to how Rocky was in the first movie. And I love that about Rocky V. I feel like it brought me back to the character, especially when he goes to the attic and he pulls out his old clothes and he whips that hat up and is like, hey, it still fits. You know, I love that. Okay, another huge thing in the column for Rocky V compared to the other sequels. All right, no, compared to Rocky IV. And Rocky Balboa, even to an extent. Now, there's one tiny little line of audio in Rocky Balboa. But Rocky IV, I gotta say, it gets demoted on the list for one reason only. No Mickey. It's the only one in the whole series. Now, I should stipulate, I look at the Rocky films as 1 through 5, and I'll explain why this is at the end of this video. 1 through 5 is, to me, a series. Rocky 6, Rocky Balboa, is a coda, if you want it. Not necessary, but a very good film. I've actually made a fan edit of Rocky Balboa that I think is actually a little bit stronger movie than the theatrical cut. But yeah, you don't really need Rocky Balboa. And it, in a sense, it kind of undermines Rocky V, but I'll get to that. I consider Rocky 1 through 5 a series. Rocky Balboa is a coda, and then Creed I'm looking at as a totally different film series. I don't feel like it's really necessary, but it's being well made, so you know I'll watch Creed 2. I'll be there. Mickey is not in Rocky 4 at all. And Mickey rocks. And Mickey was in Rocky V in Burgess Meredith in his final role. Some of his lines are fantastic, especially like that whole scene in Mickey's gym was so good, so well done. He gives him the cufflink, and then that whole plot thread comes back when he wants to give Tommy the cufflink for Christmas, and you have all these little throwaway lines that people I don't even think pay attention to, like, you know, why I'm thinking of giving him this for Christmas. I think you've given him enough. You know, like that implication that, you know, she comes back later in the movie. If you want to teach something to somebody, teach it to your son. You know, for God's sake, you're losing your family. Like, it's so story oriented, and I don't understand the hate. I really don't. Anyway, at the end fight, you know, get up, you son of a bitch, because Mickey loves you. And you got that profile shot of Stallone's head coming up with that little smile on his face. And he gets up, and again with the music, and then that beat comes in, and you're just like, yes. Like, he's about to unload it. It's such a fun, entertaining moment. Like a crowd-pleasing moment. Love it. Speaking of crowd-pleasing moments, the big moments in this movie are so much better. Even though, yes, he doesn't get in the ring, but you get anybody to watch Rocky V all the way through. Get to that last scene in the bar where he knocks Paulie down, and you haven't had music for a while. This is another big thing. You haven't had music for a while, and you got right. The movie seems like it's kind of winding down, right? But then you got Rocky hovering over Paulie, and there's always this moment that gets me every time I watch Rocky V that I wait for, and I love this moment where Paulie's been punched in the mouth and he's got some blood coming out. He's like, should have left him on the street where you found him. And right there, I always get a chill right there because I know it's coming. And then, you know, you see Stallone's hat slowly turn around, and you get this awesome, like, bassy music cue come up just as he, and you get that great stare, that Stallone stare that you're just, man, I'm not gonna mess with that guy. And, you know, and then you get the famous line, you know, you knocked him down, why don't you try knocking me down now? And it's, oh, I love it. Just love it. Such an awesome Rocky moment. I'm sorry, you don't get anything like that in Rocky IV. Okay? You got jumping around with an American flag in Rocky IV, but nothing that badass. I mean, awesome. And then he goes out and does all these street move things, like, you know, he runs at him and he's tripping him like street style. It's so awesome. Anyway, you can tell I love this movie. Yeah, that was my next point. Street Fight is incredible. Beginning to end, it's incredible, especially when he kind of gets out of just the hand-to-hand punching and starts doing, you know, like the behind-the-back hits and things like, it's so entertaining and so satisfying. Okay, and the last point I wanted to make about Rocky V, and the biggest point I wanted to make in this entire thing, is the biggest criticism that people have of Rocky V is that it is a depressing movie. Now, number one, I'm going to compare this. I don't think it's the most depressing Rocky movie. I'm not going to include the Creed films because it's pretty depressing, Rocky having cancer, but let's say compared to Rocky II. Rocky II, he's got all this money. He blows through all of his money. He's got to sell his car. He's laughed at off of a commercial set because he can't read. He's got to take these menial jobs. He keeps getting laid off. He finds out that he has a problem with his eye, so he really shouldn't even be fighting anymore. Adrian goes into a coma giving birth. I mean, that is a really, really freaking depressing movie all the way till the end. Yeah, the ending's great, but that whole movie's a downer, man. Especially coming from Rocky, the first Rocky, where everything just kind of built to this crescendo of awesome. Rocky 2 is like this, like the whole time, and thank God he won, because if not, man, that would have... I will say, it helped Rocky 2 to do that, because everything just goes down, 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 until he's leaning over Adrian. She says, there's one thing I want you to do for me, win. And you hear that, you know, that famous Rocky bell right then. She says it again, win. And then he goes into the montage. You're like, okay, finally, this is going to get happy. This is going to go somewhere good. But man, that movie is depressing as hell. Now, Rocky V, yes, the brain damage thing is depressing. But again, it's realistic. It would happen at this point. Outside of that, I don't really find Rocky V that depressing. I find it very nostalgic. But there's a specific reason I don't think Rocky V is depressing at all. I think it's probably the most uplifting Rocky out of all of the series. Crazy, I know. Here's why. There is a number one thing that everyone misses about Rocky V, and it drives me nuts. I don't understand why people don't understand this about this movie. Rocky V is a full circle film. It was always intended to be a full circle film. It has the director from the original Rocky. It's a bookending movie in the series. There is no doubt that there is a purposeful reason why they chose the song Measure of a Man by Elton John for the end credits of Rocky V. Go look up the lyrics to that song. It will back up everything I'm about to say. In Rocky, the character learned validation through a fight, right? He just wanted to know that he could last the 15 rounds with Apollo Creed. He did. That gave his life validation. He has that awesome crescendo of a moment at the end of the film where he knows his life is valid, and, you know, great. But if you think about it, Rocky 2 and 3 kind of throw that away, because in 2, he loses all of his money, and I think, again, Rocky 2, as far as the depression level, I feel like that's the movie people think Rocky 5 is, because he loses all of his money in Rocky 2, and he realizes that maybe it wasn't the title that gave him worth. You know? You look at the guy that leaves Mickey's gym after Mickey proves to him that he can't see out of that eye, and he smacks him, and he's like, you can't fight. You don't have the tools no more. He leaves feeling so dejected and worthless. Well, then what did the first movie mean then? Like, if that's all you needed to validate your life, then you really didn't learn anything, because now your life's still invalid. I didn't get the impression in the first movie that Rocky needed money to be happy. I thought he just wanted to know he could stand toe-to-toe and go the distance. I thought that was the point. I love the Rocky series. I love all the sequels, but that kind of betrays the point of the first film if you think about it. As much as I love Rocky 2, I do, and like I said, I think it's the second best in the series for sure. But that doesn't really jive. Rocky 3, his success is being measured by, he's got a huge mansion, he's got tons of money, he's doing these charity events. And then the end of the movie is literally him facing his fear. That is how he is validating himself. He doesn't feel like a man if he can't beat this guy. That's not the Rocky we saw in the first film. And then the fourth one is a straight-up revenge flick. He's just going after this guy because he killed his friend. To me, those character motivations get so far away from where we started. And I feel like Rocky V is the perfect way to bring it back, because everybody gets depressed at the brain damage thing, which I've talked about, but they also get depressed with, he had to sell off all of his things. He had to sell off his materialism. You think about it, Rocky 2 and 3 are monuments to materialism. You can't be happy unless you have money. You can't be happy unless you win the championship and you're the biggest fighter in the world. You know, they're very 1983, 84, that era of bigger, better, big time by Peter Gabriel, right? And that was never what Rocky was about, man. And it's like when we get to Rocky 5, though, all the things that people think are depressing about it, I think bring the character back to what the character was about. Get rid of the house, get rid of the money, go back to where you started. The character at this point had kind of forgotten about his roots. He gets them all back. I mean, he's hanging out at that bar. This is a little moment that nobody even looks at that I love. When Tommy Gunn at the end of the movie is calling him out, like, come out here and fight me or you're yellow. And everybody in that bar kind of comes up behind Stallone, behind Rocky, puts their hands on his shoulders and pulls him back in. And it's like, he's got no class, whatever. It's like he's not worth it. They know he's worth more than that. He has friends. That's one of the actual scenes that I really dislike about the work print. There's a scene where he goes back to the bar and everybody's criticizing him for not having money anymore. Why aren't you boxing anymore? Why are you here telling these lame jokes? Go back and get your money back. And I'm just like, wow, that's not how. I'm glad that scene was cut, because I like that he's back and these people don't care if he has money or not. They just love him because he's Rocky. They love him because he's a good person. that's where his validation is. And more so in the arc of Rocky V, his validation, he ends up, look, just watch that last scene on the steps with his son. He's happy. And he hasn't gotten the money back. He hasn't won a championship. He's not, you know, heavyweight champ anymore. But he's fine with that. That's something that we never saw. Because if you think about Rocky II, he wasn't very happy as soon as he lost that money. This is the whole point I'm trying to get to with it being, this is a full circle movie. In the first movie, he obtains in Rocky V what he was trying to obtain in Rocky I. He didn't need the money. He didn't need the cars. He didn't need the mansion. He didn't need any of that to give himself. He's right back where he started, but now he's okay with who he is without any of it. And I love that about this movie so much. So much. And it just, it kills my heart that people don't see that about Rocky V. This is a movie where his true validation now is in his son, is in his legacy, is in what he leaves behind. It's in the relationships he has with the people around him who all love him for him because he's worth something, because he's proved, he has nothing more to prove. Great movie. I've gone on way too long, about 36 minutes, ranted about Rocky V, and to this day, I'll never understand why people hate it. I think it's a fantastic movie. I loved what John G. Avildsen did with it. I love that they brought him back to direct it. And I hate seeing, Sly Stallone just badmouth this movie about how bad it was because, I thought that it did a fantastic job bringing the series back to its roots, giving us this awesome finale that, I'm telling you, get some people together, have some drinks, then put on that last street fight in Rocky V. Everybody will be cheering. It's so good, so audience pleasing. Anyway, I'm not sure which movie I'm going to do next, guys. I'm sorry this was so long-winded, but I had a lot to say about Rocky V. I'm so tired of people trashing this movie. I've had to listen to it for God knows how long. And it's good. I'm sorry. It's a good movie. I love it. Okay. I will see you guys next time. I'm probably going to take a little bit of a rest because I'm not sure which one I'm going to do yet, and I want to get one that I feel just as strongly about next time. So thank you for watching again, and if you like this video, please like it and give me a thumbs up, whatever. So subscribe. I'll be back soon. Thanks.